Good afternoon, everyone. For those, can you everybody hear me? Can I have a thumbs up if you can hear me? Perfect, great. All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon. My name is Wesley Stefanik. I am the Chief Executive Officer of the Delaware Association of Realtors, and I'm joined here with my friend Adrian. Adrian, why don't you introduce yourself?
Well, afternoon, Wes. I'm Adrian Gallagher. I'm with Berkshire Hathaway, and I'm also on the school board of directors this year.
Yeah, thank you, Adrian. So, Adrian and I usually have these hot topic sessions where I invite an expert in to talk about specific issues. But today you have us, myself and Adrian, to talk about the short-term rental tax that I'm sure you've heard about by now. That'll be going into effect at the start of the year. So what we're going to do, just so everyone is aware, we are going to take questions throughout the presentation. Please send them directly to me. It'll have my name, Wes Stefanik, in the chat box. Try not to send them to Adrian or the other co-host, which says screen share. So try to send them to me so I make sure they all go directly to me and I can see them all. If you want to change the view in your screen, feel free because I'm going to share my screen to go through the bill itself. There's a button at the top right that says view. Feel free to make the screen look however you want when we start moving the screens around. With that, so the short-term rental tax is something our association has been involved in, invested in for, I'm being told, 20 plus years. It's been quite a while, but it really came to a head within the last, I would say, 5 to 6 years. And then everything started really running through in January of last year. Adrian, I don't know if any of the history, we're going to do this like a conversation. Adrian's going to, talk when she has thoughts, and then I'll jump in. We'll kind of play this one-on-one going through it. But Adrian, anything you want to say to start us off?
Sure. Just to back that up, Wes, we started dealing with this many, many years ago. I remember being on the rental affairs committee with SCORE and discussing this, and we came out in opposition time after time after time. But finally, this year, they certainly had the votes to get it through with or without our assistance.
Yeah, so just so everyone is aware on the call, our association had a task force probably eight-ish, nine-ish, 10 years ago that was working with our opponents, let's call them in this debate, which was the tourism bureaus down in Sussex in particular, the chambers down in Sussex, as well as the hotel industry itself, their lobbying group, their association. We're kind of the other side of this fight between us and them, unfortunately. And at the end of the day, it came down to literally us, the Delaware Association of Realtors, and the company Airbnb and another one, I believe it was VRBO. It was just us fighting the short-term rental tax. So fast forwarding to January of last year, 2023, uh, there's been years of buildup. People have been asking for this tax. They want to have a tax. The whole premise was hotels and short-term rentals should be treated equally. That's what we were fighting against, is there was this thought that it needs to be the same. Why is there any difference? Why should a hotel get a tax and short-term rentals shouldn't? So last year they introduced a bill in January, I believe it was January 4th of last year, literally at the start of session. And I'm going to share my screen now to kind of talk a little more about where we started. We're not going to take too long on the history, but as the CEO of this association, I think it's important when I can point out the value this association brings, because as I said, we were the only ones on the other side of this battle, and we were doing everything we could to fight it. But the force became too strong. There was enough votes from both parties. This was no longer a party thing. It was a bipartisan push to have this tax go through. So give me 1 second. So first off, I'm going to share with you. I'm using two screens. That's why I'm looking away. All right. So this is the General Assembly's website. You can see here HB 168. Then you can see HS1 for HB 168 and HS2 for HB 168 with House Amendment 1. There's been a lot of questions coming in that I've been getting in particular about, you know, when the governor signed it, what happens next? Why isn't it in the current law? Why, why did any of these other bills matter? So I'm going to be very clear, hopefully, and tell you exactly how this works. So in case you do want to look up more things on your own, you can. So what you're looking at right now is the Delaware General Assembly's website that lists all the legislation. In this fight that we had, HB 168 was the original bill. And it was actually, I'm sorry, I said, I think January. I meant May of last year. So that was the original bill that was introduced. And where we started was they wanted short-term rentals to be defined as 150 days or less. They also wanted to have the hotel tax itself be what we functioned under. So all they would do is add the definition of short-term rentals, which really didn't have a good definition, and those were 150 days or less, and just insert it into the hotel language. And then, which that would mean is that we also have an 8% short-term rental tax. That's what we were fighting right at the start of this whole battle. Adrian, did you want to add anything there?
You're good.
All right. So I went through my papers. We spent a lot of time on this. Part of my life, I feel like in the last 2 years, has unfortunately been spent on this short-term rental tax.
Wes
So
is an expert.
unfortunately, don't share that too far. But I wanted to point out some of the things we had concerns about back with that original legislation, and it was the definition of short-term rental tax didn't exist. We wanted a clearer definition. We wanted to have our own section in the code rather than be lumped into the hotel lodging tax. We wanted a specific section for short-term rental tax. And why we wanted that is there was issues of constitutionality around the idea of putting certain provisions for short-term rentals within the current hotel lodging tax. That became a whole issue in its own. So we wanted our own section that you could define exactly what a short-term rental is and how tax would be collected and what it would cover, everything specific to short-term rentals. We wanted to make sure that all short-term rentals were required to be licensed, not just real estate brokers facilitating them and Airbnb, VRBO, et cetera, et cetera. It had to be all because if we're doing this, it's got to be fair. And then some of the other things we wanted to make sure the tax would only apply to certain things, and that certain thing meaning only the rent itself. And Adrian, I guess you can talk a little more about, and I'm sure everybody knows, there's other additions for short-term rentals. We wanted to
Yeah,
make sure
we
that
really fought to keep such things as linen rentals, cleaning fees, all the ancillary charges that come up in a reservation. We wanted it to just be a tax on the rent and had to really explain why in many instances.
we were also looking for provisions in terms of collection to make it clearer for brokers in particular, because keep in mind, we as an association were looking out for the broker's best interest in this whole situation. And we were looking to make sure like the actual taxation collection made sense. So we were looking for specifically the tax would be on the whole stay after the fact. And then further, we were looking for things like um, we would love to have how it is in Lewis right now, a once a year tax collection. That was a big goal of ours. Unfortunately, that didn't happen, which we'll get into. We wanted to keep things like the county tax language the same, which we'll get into. And then we wanted to make sure that the convention and visitors bureaus in particular were actually advertising both hotels and short-term rentals because now they're going to be getting more money for the short-term rental tax. They should also make the effort as those groups to advertise what's out in the available marketplace, meaning hotels, short-term rentals, etc. They shouldn't just focus on hotels, which is a huge group that supports those associations. Now they're getting short-term rental tax money. They should make an effort to advertise all available options. So H, let's see here. HB 168 was what was introduced at the beginning. After we submitted those comments, and we're really boiling down what happened here, but once we submitted those comments, a new bill came out, which was House Substitute 1 for House Bill 168. This bill actually was worse, which we couldn't believe happened at that time. But what this really boiled down to was this weird definition of accommodations intermediary. And you can see that here. It's a little weird to see. I know it's small. I can't make it bigger. But it made it very specific in saying a person who rents property owned by such person on a casual or isolated basis shall not be deemed an accommodations intermediary. Uh, Hated that language. So that was something we focused on a lot going into the next bill. But what does casual and isolated mean? Still don't know that and never got a definition for that. So ultimately, we were successful in defining that more, but we did have to stick with the term accommodations intermediary. All right, so after we fought that one, we got to the next bill, which is the one where we had the greatest impact in drafting itself, which ended up being what the governor just signed, which was House Substitute 2 for House Bill 168 with House Amendment 1. Now, like I said earlier, a lot of people have been asking me, where is this in the law? Why is it not in the law? I want to address that right now up front. The governor has a lot of bills he's just been signing, so they've been slightly delayed in updating the statutes themselves. But this was signed by the governor, it's law. So it's already in. It's just the statute book, the code itself is not updated. But if you're interested in looking at that, you can go to the Delaware General Assembly's website and then click under, I believe it's Delaware laws, and go to view Delaware code. You're going to see here the different titles. And I'm going to switch back to this for once we start going through the bill to show you exactly where you're going to go when you're seeking this. So with that, let's dive right into the bill itself. Give me one moment, and I'm going to switch a couple screens here. All right, so the ultimate bill the governor signed is now before you on your screen. All right, we're going to go section by section and explaining it. I'm also going to later in the presentation add a explainer that our association made to better make it more friendly reading in case you want to share it. One of the questions I just got, has the governor signed this into law yet? He did as of, I believe it was September.
The 30th.
Yeah, I think it was September 30th. So this is the law. So keep in mind everything we're about to talk about is it's real. It's no longer theoretical. All right, here we go. So, and I'll also explain, I'll try to be a little helpful in explaining parts of like, if you've never seen a bill in the legislative text, I'll try to be helpful in explaining some of that. So here we go. This bill required three-fifths of the legislature, both House and the Senate, to push the bill forward to the governor. They got that overwhelmingly, and we'll revisit that a little later. But they had votes by both Democrats and Republicans to pass it, and they successfully did back in June of this year, June 27th to be exact. So the first part of the bill is going to be in the future law under Title 30, Section 2301. So again, I said referring back to the current law. Give me a second. My computer is now not letting me. Sorry, everyone. I'm going to be jumping a bunch of screens here. All right, so back to the Delaware Code itself. So I said Title 30, Section 2301. So Title 30 is state taxes. 2301 is the cost of occupational licenses and fees. If you're a broker, if you're a salesperson, you're already paying these fees. This is where this new accommodations intermediary section is going to be. It's supposed to be number 28. You can see it's still not there, so they haven't updated the final website. I just wanted to point that out as how you can find that in the future if you're looking for it. If you want to refer directly to the law rather than the bill itself, that's where you would go. Let's see here, back to the bill itself. All right, so that new license that everyone is going to be required to get is right here. It's called an accommodations intermediary. And I'm going to just go line by line. I feel like this is the easiest way and the best way to do it. Accommodations intermediary means any person, also meaning any business, because that's what a person can be defined as, engaged in the business of facilitating or arranging a short-term rental to an occupant on a website or through other means, including the renting of properties subject to a timeshare. But the term accommodations intermediary includes a real estate broker, but does not include the real estate licensees working under that broker. That's something that we worked on right at the last second there to make sure that all salespersons under a broker don't have to get a separate license. It would just be the broker themselves getting it, which means the broker themselves has to get a $25 accommodations intermediary license. The owner of short-term rentals, as defined later in the bill in section 6201, that exclusively uses a third-party accommodations intermediary, meaning a broker or a website that facilitates short-term rentals, shall not be deemed an accommodations intermediary under this section. The words are
It's
already
a
getting
mouthful.
confusing. Yeah. So, Adrian, anything you want to say about that one? We can dive in.
Just like Wes said, the initial accommodations intermediary was pretty bad, and we did, I think, fought really hard to get this whittled down to just being the broker that has to has to pay this fee to become an accommodations intermediary versus every one of our licensees. So kudos on that good work, Wes.
I said a little bit earlier, but one of our biggest concerns here was making sure that there was not an exodus of short-term rental owners switching and doing it on their own or going to someone that's not, going to be properly licensed and follow the law. That's why this language that they would still, even if you as an individual are renting out your property, there is exemptions later, which we'll get into. But if you are doing like a full summer rental of your short-term rental property, you would still now have to get um, an accommodations intermediary license and collect tax on that rental.
Right.
All right, so let's keep going here. I see some of the questions on the screen. What if you're a realtor who uses both VRBO but also directly to pass guests that were once rented through VRBO? So let me make sure I think I have it right. So if you are, let's just say, an agent that uses VRBO in this situation to facilitate your rentals, the website itself, which VRBO in this situation is required to get an accommodations intermediary license. So that website itself is going to be collecting the tax. So you, as then the agent, um, you wouldn't have to collect the tax.
I have a comment.
Good.
I don't think that's necessarily true for all agents. Some of us only use the websites as a marketing tool and collect the rent and would collect the tax. So
Yep.
we would still be the accommodations intermediary for our listings.
Yep. And yeah, just to, I guess, put a finer point on, because I guess it depends on the situation, but depending what the website is. So VRBO most likely will be getting a license. If this is like Facebook Marketplace, if you will, and you're doing it through something like that or Craigslist, the old ways, uh, you're going to probably be the accommodations intermediary because that website itself doesn't have the mechanisms to collect tax, distribute the tax, and send it off. So in that case, yeah. Where do you get the broker license? I'm not entirely sure what that question means, so I'm going to skip that one. If you can add more context to that, that would be great. All right, so that's the license section of the bill. We're going to dive right next into the short-term rental lodging tax section itself, which is now in Title 30. It's going to be a brand new section right next to the lodging tax section. So again, keep in mind, hotels are now treated differently than short-term rentals. Hotels defined as a couple other things as well, but short-term rentals specifically, under the definition we're about to go into, are treated differently. One of the questions I have here is, does the owner have to have a license as well if it is listed with an agent? The answer is no. If the agent has the accommodations intermediary license, you as the owner do not have to. Now, if you are renting it on your own, as the owner, let's say you do kind of like 50-50 type thing. You have it listed maybe, but then you find someone on your own. That's where it's going to get tricky. Most likely you're also going to have to get a license in that case. The $25 fee for the accommodations intermediary license that the broker is responsible to get. Okay, something to keep in mind with what we're talking about now. The governor just signed it, which means there is no regulations in place for the enforcement of it. That's what happens right now at this point in time. The governor just signed it. Department of Finance now needs to write regulations around this to create the forms, which we'll talk about, to create the license category, to create the mechanism to get the license and then a mechanism to pay the tax itself. All that has to be done within the next couple months before this goes fully enforced. So there's going to be a lot of open-endedness to this yet, just because all that's happening right now. We wanted to make sure we had this session now, just to make sure everyone understands what's about to happen and what's coming as of January 1st, when the whole bill goes into effect. All right, let's move on here to, well, you can see Chapter 62, short-term rental tax. It's going to switch to the next page. All right, one thing to keep in mind is many of these lines themselves, like even singular lines like rent, took many meetings and and lots of time. This is not a perfect bill. It is not everything we were seeking. We had to negotiate with multiple parties. Department of Finance came in at the last minute and changed a lot of what we wanted that we had already negotiated out. So we talk about it now as in something we've definitely worked many hours on, but of course it's not what we wanted at the end of the day, but it's the best we could get with the options we had available to us. So going into it, definitions. The rent means the consideration received for occupancy, valued in money, whether received in money or otherwise. The rent does not include municipal taxes, linen rental fees, cleaning fees, insurance fees, security deposits, other add-on fees not usually considered part of the rent, and holdover leases. The holdover lease thing was way too much work. I can't believe it took so much time to understand that, if we're having someone go month to month in the rent, they should not now be considered a short-term rental. So we got that exempted. But yes, it boils down to pure rent now based on this definition. All right, next is the definition for a short-term rental itself. So, short-term rental means a house, duplex, multiplex, apartment, condominium, houseboat, trailer, or other residential dwelling unit where a tourist or transient guest, for consideration, rents sleeping or living accommodations for no more than 31 consecutive nights. Again, excuse me, where we started, 150 days, we were able to get down to 31 days, which we found as a huge win, 31 consecutive days. That right there took a lot of work. And quite frankly, we were kind of proud with how far we got it down based on what we were fighting against. We had, there was comments like, okay, landlord tenant, I believe it's 119, 120 days. They wanted to go to that and make it a nice, clean definition. But we're like, that's still crazy. What if people need a short-term rental for a myriad of reasons, whether it be short-term employment, people at the base needing a house for a little while, people between houses. There's so many examples we could give of people that are not using short-term rentals as vacation homes, which is what they were primarily wanting this to be, is they wanted to get the people from out of state primarily and get some tax money out of them. Um, so we got it down to 31 consecutive days. And in this definition, which does not, short-term rental does not include these list of items here. Anything else on that, Adrian?
No, I think, again, to your point, they didn't understand what a short-term rental was, or they, not that they didn't understand. I think they were really trying to draw in far too many scenarios into where they could collect tax from. So that was really hard fought. And I do believe most of these exemptions are already in the other code, that the like healthcare facilities, campsites, overnight camps for children.
Yep. And
Those are all.
I'm going to get to G. I want to get to one of the statements that I just got in the questions. And it is just to clarify, any rental longer than 31 days does not have a short-term rental tax. Yeah. It goes up to 31 days. So that's it. That's a big win.
So if it's 33 days, it's not, you don't have to pay the tax.
Yep. So G, a rental, I'm sorry. Yeah, G, a rental arranged directly by the property owner on a casual and isolated basis that meets all the following qualifications. You know how much we said we hated that phrase, casual and isolated. Well, we were able to finally get them to define that better. And quite frankly, it's still a little confusing. It says the rent is substantially below market rates and the property is used as a rental for no more than 10 nights in aggregate per calendar year. We tried, I'll say that. This was one of those last minute things that we could not get them to bend on. Uh, we think it makes sense in all reality, for those situations where someone's renting out maybe their bedroom for a weekend or something. That would be exempted unless they're doing it for more than 10 aggregate nights a year. All right. Next one is Section 6202, levy of short-term rental lodging tax. So again, the bill started at 8, which is the same number the hotels have to charge in tax, 8%. Now, keep in mind, we're talking about a new state tax. We're not addressing the county tax yet or the local taxes. So we're just talking about the new state tax itself. So we went from 8%, we got them down to 4.5% for the tax rate. I don't think there's much more I can say about that, even though that took many hours also. Next item is the collection of tax, 6203. Accommodations intermediaries are responsible for collecting and remitting the short-term rental tax under the section of this title unless the accommodations intermediary has a contractual agreement with a hotel, motel, tourist home, or other accommodations intermediary licensed under this title to collect and remit tax in accordance with this chapter. The short-term rental tax must be collected no later than the earlier of the final payment of all rent due or occupancy of the short-term rental. If a short-term rental stay is canceled in whole or in part, the canceled portion of the stay must not be subject to the short-term rental tax, and any amount of tax collected for such canceled portion must be refunded. Adrian, you want to talk a little more about this battle we had?
Yeah, so they wanted to collect the tax at every payment. So you get a deposit in January for a July arrival. They expected us to collect the tax on that portion at that time and remit it to the state. And we had to sit and explain the realities of the rental business in that quite often people may put a deposit down in January and then for some unforeseen reason have to cancel their July stay. And it just didn't make a whole lot of sense for us to collect a tax in January and then have to refund it, try to get the money back from the state, which you know how that goes. So they finally relented and let us cancel it with the final payment, which still isn't perfect. We wanted to have it due after the guests departed. They wouldn't go for that. They said when you collect that final balance, that is when the tax is due payable to the state. The next month, I think it's due by the 15th of the following month. So that's as far as we could get them to go.
Yeah, a lot of this also was kind of a battle between how hotels currently do it, all the procedures they had already in place, they wanted to kind of mimic, but of course it had to be rewritten to base it around the new section of the code, the short-term rental tax code. Um, this is something we couldn't get them to really budge too far on, but yeah, I think at the end of the day it was a huge win because, if you're collecting a deposit, you have to send the tax right in, and maybe that's months away from the actual stay. So this was what we were able to settle on. So I have no more questions at this point, so I'm going to keep going. Remittance of tax. The amount of tax collected for each month shall be reported and paid over to the Department of Finance not later than the 15th day of the month following the month of collection on forms to be prescribed by the Department of Finance. Okay, so again, as I said earlier, the governor just signed it. This is what the regulations that are being written have to be figured out. So they're going to have to create the forms. They're going to have to create the mechanisms for collection. But this itself, this is where I said maybe it would have been nice if we could have been more like Lewis, where you do it, what is it, January each?
January of the following year. Yeah.
Yep. We tried that. That was our starting point. That was just a no-go. Then we tried obviously breaking it down like maybe every 6 months, because then could do maybe a whole season, but it didn't matter. They wanted what the hotels currently do, which is the 15th day of the following month. And the punishment for not doing that is the next sentence. Interest at the rate of 1% per month or fraction thereof shall be charged on payments made after the prescribed due date. So that's the punishment in the bill if you do not collect the tax appropriately. All right, I'm going to keep going. Oh, I got a question here. Okay. Great question, Ryan. It is, I know that Airbnb and VRBO automatically collect and pay this out for other states. Do you know if this will happen for Delaware? After hearing what their lobbyists had to say, yeah, they pretty much just have to flip a switch, to be honest. They'll get the license as an accommodations intermediary. They will collect the tax and then remit it to the state. So going back to the scenarios at the start here, so let's think that through a little bit more. If you as a short-term rental owner yourself go directly to one of those websites, in that case, I'm going to use them. I don't want to do the names, but I'm going to. Airbnb, VRBO, they're going to have a license. If that's the only mechanism you're using to facilitate your short-term rental, all the tax collection is going to be done for you and taken care of. That's the easiest and cleanest way. Same thing if you're a brokerage doing the same thing. Um, it's going to be the brokerage itself is going to have the license and remit the tax. And if you do it yourself, it would be the same thing. The penalty is simple. It's right there. It's interest at the rate of 1% per month or fraction thereof shall be charged in payments made after the prescribed due date, which is the same the hotels have already. So they kept that language the same. Okay. So yeah, Ryan, just to answer that question again, yes. From what we know, Airbnb, VRBO, they're just going to flip a switch and they'll collect it. That's something now you as brokerages need to figure out if you facilitate your rentals on one of those sites or other sites that I'm not aware of. You just got to make sure someone has the license there if you're facilitating through a website like that and or you're doing it on your own. The same question I just got again. If you're using Airbnb, VRBO, you don't need to get a license. I can't fully say yes or no to that. You have to make sure whatever website, those two situations, I think you're going to be safe. But if there's other websites you're doing that, you need to make sure, you just got to make sure who has a license in that situation and who's collecting tax. All right. I think I answered all the questions there. All right. Moving on. I'm losing, I'm running out of breath already here, Adrian, flying through
You
it.
want me to take over?
No, no, you're good. You're good. All right. Accommodations. Obligations of an accommodations intermediary. Let me make sure I have it all up here. That's this section here. All right. An accommodations intermediary must do all the following. One, remit data required by the Division of Revenue in a format and manner prescribed by the division, which may include may. It used to say shall until we had it changed to may. This was a fight with the Division of Revenue. Ultimately, all this means is they're going to create a form that's going to have requirements so that they know which property the tax is being collected from. Two, ensure that the accommodations intermediary license number is affixed on all marketing materials for each rental. All right, I know how many people, I know how you're going to feel about this one, but this was actually more of a safeguard for, I think, everyone that we were able to work in here. The thought behind this, I think, is simple. There needs to be some sort of tracking mechanism so that there can be some sort of enforcement if people are not following the rules. Again, I mean, we, as our position as an association, we know our members are going to enforce the law, uh, follow the law, I should say. And we want to make sure everybody else played by the same rules. I don't know, Adrian, if you want to add any more there, or does that sum that up?
That pretty much sums it up.
All
Make sure
right.
everybody's doing it right.
Now, again, regulations have to be written. So, what the ultimate definition of that will be is unknown. We're going to be involved in that as soon as the Department of Finance starts doing that, which is going to have to be any day now, but we have no news of it to date. And then provide the state with all necessary data, again, just so they can do their jobs to make sure they're enforcing the law now, in this case. All right, next thing here. Distribution of, okay, so that's the tax itself. The next couple sections are not exactly relevant to the tax itself from your perspectives. It's going to be how the state treats it, that revenue that comes in. So just so everyone knows where the money goes, that's this section here. Nothing's actually changed here. This is the same language that's from the hotel lodging tax. We wanted to do certain things to change it, but it became a battle that was not as important as some of the other things. So we backed off a little on this. And they kept it the same. We That was the end of that. I would say the next section here, eligible organizations, you see where it's underlined and crossed out, certain things are changed. They added some more chambers of commerce to the list of where the money's going to go. So that's all that section is. It's mostly chambers, tourism bureaus, convention or visitor bureaus. I think that's all of them there. Then the next section here is, let's see here. All right. So one of the things we wanted, as I said earlier, we wanted to make sure these groups that are now getting the short-term rental tax actually, tell people from outside of Delaware that short-term rentals are an option. So we couldn't have firm language in here, but we got the suggestion. It's not that big of a deal, but I think it's important if it comes up that recipient organizations shall make every effort to market a variety of lodging options available in the marketplace. Let's see here. Keep going. This next section here is the county language, section 5. And sorry, the PDF keeps switching, so it keeps doing that. But what it pretty much says is that Newcastle County and Sussex County have the option of collecting a short-term rental tax. Uh, right now, they don't. They don't, and remind me, Adrian, they don't collect the hotel tax either, right?
I don't believe so, no.
Yeah,
Not
so they have the option in law to collect this tax, but right now they do not. Kent County doesn't even have the option. That maintained from prior law with the hotel tax. Oh, I'm sorry, yeah, with the hotel tax, they don't have any option to actually do that. So anybody in Kent doesn't have to worry about the county tax until a state law is passed to allow for that. And then the final parts of the bill. which the only other important part is section 7, the last couple lines. When this goes into effect. I know I have comments. I'm a little behind on all those. I see that. Sorry about that. But the bill goes into effect 90 days after it's signed. That's section 1. So that's the accommodations intermediary section. So 90 days, which is, I think it's would be what, December 30th, I think in this case, is when the license is going to be required to be, you have to go get. Again, we don't know what that looks like until the regulations are done. Section 2 of this act is effective immediately and only applies to short-term rental agreements entered into on or after January 1st, 2025. This was one of our last big battles. They wanted some language that made no sense, that pretty much said it went into effect right away. We're like, that's not reality. First of all, there's nobody knows about the tax and no one knows how to collect the tax. No one knows who needs to get a license. Even though this is a short window of time, uh, I think everyone can see that it means into on or after January 1st, 2025. So no one needs to worry about collecting a tax until after that date, which was actually a big win because of all the work that went into that. But yeah, on or after January 1st. So if you have contracts you're going into for next summer already, just remember on or after January 1st, 2025, when you're working with your clients. All
Exactly.
right. Go ahead. Was that Adrian?
I'm good.
So I'm going to kind of go back and answer the questions I can in the order. I'm going to go backwards here. What happens if guests pay their 2025 rental fees before January 1st? Well, that line I think is there. Enter into or after January 1st. I'm not going to give any legal advice. I'm telling you just what it says. That means execute. I'm going to read what it says from the screen. This is not coming from my personal thoughts. That means executed leases and not that they have to be paid in full. That means executed leases and not that they have to be paid in full, correct? Where am I at here? Only applies to short-term rental agreements entered into or after January 1st. I hope that's clear. Adrian, any thoughts, any comments on that one?
That is my opinion as well. Entered into or after January 1st.
All right. What happens within the municipality? Rehoboth is 7%. Is this an addition or are they exempt in city limits? All right. So this is where our next phase of watching what happens in the world is going to be for the next few years because there's some things that came out of this that we always have to be watching for. So you have the state tax, which covers all short-term rentals within the state of Delaware. That's what we're talking about with this bill. The counties have the option, particularly Newcastle and Sussex, have the option to adopt a short-term rental tax up to 3% whenever they decide they want to do that. Currently, they do not. Now, when we get to the municipal level and unincorporated areas, we got to be a little more specific here. The way it is now is Rehoboth can have one, and in addition, you now have the 4.5% state tax. So it's in addition. If it's in an unincorporated area in a county, uh, there's no short-term rental tax unless the county institutes one. There's the state short-term rental tax. Does that make sense?
So I think the question is if Rehoboth has a 7%, yes, it's going to be 7% for Rehoboth plus 4.5% to the state.
One of the things that came up at the end here, which started to impact what we were dealing with this bill, was Kent County started talking about expanding their hotel tax so that it would cover, let me think here, it would cover, I'm sorry, not Kent County. The city of Dover asked Kent County if hold on, I'm going to mess this up here. I believe it was Kent County wanted to have a tax on all the unincorporated areas, I believe. So there would have been double taxation at the local level. That doesn't happen yet. That's something we have to watch out for in the future. So, Kent County could have their Kent County short-term rental tax cover the city of Dover as well as the unincorporated areas. That is definitely not what we want and we're watching out for. But that's what they were trying to do last minute with a separate bill that was unrelated to this due to the budget issues in Kent County. But that's something we're always going to watch for. Okay, so the next thing is someone fighting the additional tax within each municipality? Um, I don't technically know what's going on at the local level. Your local associations can answer that more. Um, I know, I know Lewis, I believe, just went up 1%. Is that correct, Adrian?
I don't know if it went into effect. They were trying to go from 5 to 6, but
Mhm.
we tried to fight it.
So just keep in mind for the purposes of today, at the state association, I don't do any local government affairs. So I only know, some basics. But yes, if you're interested, go ahead and do that on your own too. We'll work with your local association, but that would be a local issue to talk to the municipalities. I'm going to go back here a little more. Um, what happens if guests pay their 2025 rental fees before January 1st? Again, I'll just repeat the same thing again. Um, into or on or after January 1st. Can you type out the full bill? I'm searching HS2, HB 168 with House Amendment 1. I can't find it in the Delaware site. What I'll do to make it easy for you is I'm going to put it right in the chat that you can find it yourself. And let's see here. The next item is, so if the tax is collected at the second payment, then regardless, all guests would have to pay the tax unless they are paid in full. So if the tax is collected at the second payment, then regardless, all guests would have to pay the tax unless they are paid in full. Not entirely sure I understand that question. If you could try to write that. Oh, prior to 2025? Again, same thing. That last sentence is gold, or that second to last sentence for all these questions with when it goes into effect. Nothing matters until January 1st, 2025. All right, let me see here. If you have a different license number for Airbnb versus VRBO versus booking versus direct rentals. So would you, as a broker, I assume the question's being asked? No. So Airbnb, I'm going to use the examples provided. Airbnb, VRBO, booking.com, most likely, if they offer that as a benefit, as a service to using that website, probably are going to flip a switch, as they say, as they have said, flip a switch, and they'll begin to collect the tax and remit it to the state. They would be getting the license. So again, it's just going to be a little confusing about who is asking that question. Is it the short-term rental owner? Is it you as independent brokerages or salesperson asking that question, or the website asking that question? As long as the tax being collected somewhere in that stream, um, yeah, it just depends who's asking it, I think. All right, let's see here. If a lease is signed before January but not paid in full until after January 1st, will they still have to apply the tax or pay the tax? The lease is entered into before January. I'm not going to give the legal advice there, but the lease has been entered into before January. All right, I think I got through most of the questions here. Adrian, anything you want to add on? I have one question here I can't answer right now regarding commissions. So I'll get back to you. I know who you are. I'll get back to you on that one. I think we got all the questions so far. So a couple things again, I want to repeat. That's the important goal there if you're talking to clients right now. The tax only in agreements entered into or after January 1st, 2025. Let me see here. Oh, I got some more here. if the guest books in 2024 and the first payment is due in 2024, but the final payment is due in 2025, but the tax still be required since the tax is collected at the final payment. Again, entered into. I I think that covers it. So yeah, keep in mind, regulations are being written by the Department of Finance right now. The association's watching out for those. It goes through the regulatory process. So we're going to insert our comments. I already know who's going to be handling that at the division. So we're going to work with them to make sure they understand that this is not just a Airbnb, VRBO versus brokerages handling short-term rentals. It's got to make sense for all parties involved. So we're working on that. They have to be done so everybody can get a license in time before the end of December. The tax itself doesn't have to be collected, as we went over a few times, until January 1st for those leases entered into that day and after. And let's see here. Some things to keep in mind, which is where our policy discussions have gone, is you have some municipalities that have well, actually, Adrian, we skipped by one part that I think is important. Why'd we end up even talking about 4.5% in the first place?
I think we were trying to get down to three initially. Didn't we come in at three? And then I don't even know. My mind is perplexed as to four and a half, how we got there.
Yeah, so part of it though was you have municipalities. Part of what happened in the past is the state allowed all these municipalities to create their own short-term rental taxes. So now you have all these municipalities that have different rates, and now all of a sudden the state's going to come in and drop on an 8% short-term rental tax, which we thought made absolutely no sense because obviously there's a difference between hotel lodging, et cetera, and short-term rental units themselves, whether they're full houses or condo units. They're different. There's a different service there from a hotel to a short-term rental. Hence why we wanted our own section uh, in law that describes that. But looking at the tax itself, let's use trying to think of a good example, Adrian. Maybe Lewis is the good example. Uh, Lewis has a different rate for hotels, and they have a short-term rental tax right now, independent of the hotel tax. They're already two separate tax rates. Is that correct?
Correct.
Yeah, so already it's all out of whack. So adding 8% on to a short-term rental in Lewis is going to be a different rate than the hotels have. So right there in that one municipality, short-term rentals are being treated differently than hotels are.
It would have been 13% in Lewis.
So if you're
Um,
not, okay.
the other thing I wanted for you to explain was this whole idea of a cap, because I know that a lot of people have asked me, why is there not a cap? Um, but you explained it very well to me, so perhaps you can explain it to everybody.
Oh gosh, I wasn't ready for that one. So the idea of the cap was one of the original pieces of legislation. The idea would have been you would write into state code, you would write into the law that there would be a cap on all short-term rental taxes. So let's just make up some numbers. Rehoboth has, let's just say, a 5% local municipal tax. And then the county puts their 3% on top of that. And now the state throws on 8% on top of that. The idea was originally, let's make this cap of 11%, no matter what. Those three entities can't go above 11%. That idea falls apart immediately because the state kind of let the cat out of the bag way back when they allowed all these municipalities to set their own rates. They would have had to do charter changes for every single municipality, and that would have just never happened. That would have been battle after battle after battle. So it didn't actually make any sense because you just can't. Who's gonna take the loss? Let's say Rehoboth wants up to 11%. Well, is this what's the county and state going to do in that situation? So it just didn't work. Um, a cap doesn't work unless you would have started backwards years ago, but they didn't. Everybody has a short-term rental tax at the local level already. Does that kind of answer that?
That does. And then the other, the whole equitable taxation was a big factor, the hotels said that it wasn't equitable. And I think that also helped us negotiate down to the 4.5% because like, look at 8 plus 5 and 13 in Lewis, that is not equitable because Lewis doesn't charge hotels any tax. They're just charged the 8% state tax. So
Yeah,
I think that reasoning did help us there too.
I was trying to find the chart we made, but I can't find it right now in my pile here. But yeah, we went through a lot of municipalities to show, okay, this is what the hotels have to pay versus short-term rentals at each different level, the local, state, I'm sorry, local, county, state. So, if the Sussex County decides to throw it on right now, uh, in reality, they're going to pay 4.5 state tax. If Sussex threw in their full 3%, so you're at what, 7.5? There's no more local tax. So on short-term rentals, it's 7.5 versus if you walk right into one of the municipalities that has one, Lewis, for example, 6. Short-term rentals are now 6 plus 4.5. So it's already up when hotels are on the opposite side of that one. So it just depends, again, where you're at, which municipality you're standing in. It impacts it differently. Hotels might be paying more than short-term rentals or the opposite. So we wanted to get it down because there's no way of going backwards. There's no way we're going to get charter changes. So we thought, let's get the tax down lower for short-term rentals themselves. And it just makes more sense across the board. I think when we looked at surrounding states, I believe Virginia has just slightly more in tax than all of our surrounding competitors. So we're we're still in a competitive place with a 4.5% short-term rental tax. The question I just got is legislation state level or county level? Is there any talk about county tax as well? Yeah, I think I kind of went over that. That's up to the counties to decide. Newcastle and Sussex have the power to enforce or to create a short-term rental tax in each of those counties. Currently, they do not. Please don't give them any ideas for your own benefit. But they actually have that ability right now to do it if they wanted to, up to 3%. And again, Kent County doesn't have that power at all. Uh, they, I guess there's been some history with that in the past. There was an issue with it because it was all going to pay for D turf, I believe. And they threw out that part of the law a couple years ago. So Kent County doesn't have any ability to do it right now. What about the city of Wilmington? I know there's a lot more going on with short-term rentals in Wilmington that I can't speak to. Um, I would directly follow it with the city of Wilmington. But no matter what, there's a 4.5% short-term rental tax on all short-term rentals in the state of Delaware. That's that's your baseline at this point. All right, I have no more questions. So I'm just going to let everybody know, as an association, we're going to continue to send out information about this as the regulatory process goes forward. Uh, I'm going to send out on Wednesday in our Fast Facts email the new document we created to explain the bill and the different sections. So look out for that. It's been updated based on the governor signing it at the end of September. And I'm going to follow up with the one question I have in the chat that I can't answer right now. And with that, Adrian, I think that's all I have. Did you have any final thoughts?
No, Wes, thank you.
Yeah, again, not something we wanted. Somehow we became somewhat experts on it, unfortunately. But we tried our best as an association to get something that made sense based on the huge vote in support of this. Again, it came down to this idea, the hotels were pushing the idea that it's unequal. Why are short-term rentals getting a free ride when hotels have to pay a tax? And that's what we were up against. Both parties agreed with that premise. That's what we were fighting against. The recent articles you could probably read in Delaware today or Delaware Spotlight, I believe. It was just us. We were the only ones on the other side. We did what we can to make this bill digestible, let's say. So I think we did our part as much as we could. We know it's not the best. We hope you can work with it. If you have suggestions in the future or about it, let us know. It's not something we want to bring up if we don't have to. But if there's major issues that come out from it, let us know and we can dive into that into future legislative sessions. But with that, if there's any other questions, feel free to email info@delawarerealtor.com. Again, info, info at delawarerealtor.com. and we'll try to get you a question as soon as possible. I would just keep in mind some things are going to change due to the regulatory process. So we'll see what happens in the next couple months, but we'll keep you all informed. So with that, I have no more questions. Adrian, thank you for taking the time to join me today. Thank you everyone for joining. Have a great day.
Thanks, Les.